Friends, I'm Mr. Dark Web, and today I'm going to tell you a story that will shatter one of the most enduring myths of our time. Did you know that casinos around the world make $450 billion every year? That's more than the GDP of most countries in the world. And do you know what this empire is built on? On one simple illusion, that the average person can beat the system. 3 months ago, I came across a forum where a certain user under the nickname MIT Genius was selling a secret blackjack strategy from the students of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, which, by the way, I told you about in my not long ago video. You can see the video on my channel. Promised a 100% profit, thousands of customers, hundreds of rave reviews. I decided to investigate. Is there really people who can guarantee to beat the casino? What I found in internet archives, court documents, and public databases shocked even me. Behind every successful casino cheating story is a tragedy. Behind every genius who supposedly cracked the system, there is a person who lost everything. My name is Mr. Dark Web, and today I'm going to show you how the most sophisticated money-grubbing machine in the history of mankind works. A machine that doesn't just steal your money, it steals your ability to think rationally. It all started with one strange discovery in the archives of the Wayback Machine, a site that existed for just 3 weeks in the year 2017 and then disappeared without a trace. It contained a single article entitled, "Why I Will Never Enter a Casino Again." The author was a man who described himself as a former mathematician from Las Vegas. In the article, he wrote, "Friends, I worked at Bellagio Casino for 5 years. I was part of the team that developed algorithms for slot machines, and I want to tell you the truth which the industry hides. Randomness in casinos does not exist. Every spin, every card, every roll of the dice is calculated to make you lose. Not some of you, but all of you, without exception." The article ended with the cryptic phrase, "If you want to know the truth about how modern casinos work, search for document number Vegas Internal 2016 in the archives of the Nevada Gaming Commission." I spent a whole week looking for this document, and what I found made me realize everything we think about casinos is a lie. A beautiful, carefully constructed lie on which an industry worth almost $500 billion has been built. Do you want to know what is hidden in this document? Want to understand why even the smartest mathematicians in the world can't beat the system? Then get ready for a journey into a world where numbers lie and randomness exists only in the imagination of the players. Because what I discovered next changed my perception not only of casinos, but also of how the human mind can be manipulated. After a week of searching the archives of the Nevada Gaming Commission, I found the document that the mathematician from Bellagio Casino was talking about. The document turned out to be an internal report by the consulting company Gaming Analytics Inc. on the current state of mathematical threats in the gambling industry. 37 pages of dry statistics, graphs, and conclusions. But one section in particular stood out, analyzing the effectiveness of historical schemes in the current environment. And do you know what it said about the famous MIT team, which I already told you about in one of my previous investigations? I quote verbatim, "Card-counting schemes of the 1980s have zero efficiency in modern conditions. The technological solutions of the last 20 years completely exclude the possibility of gaining a mathematical advantage through traditional methods. Zero efficiency. Zero. Even those legendary dinosaurs who once took millions out of casinos could not make a cent today. But that was only the beginning of the shocking discoveries. In the same document, I found a section entitled Mathematical House Advantage, Real Numbers, versus public claims. What was written there explained why $450 billion annually flowed from players' pockets into casino safes. Have you ever wondered why there are no windows or clocks in casinos? Why the air smells different? Why the sounds of the machines are so intrusive? The official version is to create atmosphere. The reality was much more sinister. The section on psychological techniques for maximizing playtime described techniques that were more like brainwashing techniques, special lighting that suppresses melatonin production, sound frequencies that stimulate the release of dopamine, scents that are discreetly sprayed through the ventilation system and influence decision-making. But the most shocking was the graph on page 23. It showed the correlation between the time spent in the casino and the money lost. The first hour, the player could even win. The second hour, suffer small losses. But after 4 hours, the curve went sharply downward. After 8 hours of play, 97% of the players would leave at a loss. 97%. Out of 1,000 people who spent a whole day in the casino, only 30 went home with a profit. And then I remembered about MIT Genius with its secret strategy for $300. Are there really people in the year 2025 who believe they can beat this system? I decided to investigate his offer further. I registered a fake account on that forum and wrote that I was ready to buy the scheme. The reply came 2 hours later. A link to a Telegram channel with 18,000 subscribers. The channel description featured a picture of a luxury yacht and the caption, "I make $200,000 a month on blackjack. I'll teach you." Below that were dozens of testimonials from satisfied clients with screenshots of the amounts they had allegedly won. But when I scrutinized these screenshots, I noticed an interesting detail. They were all taken at online casinos, but the MIT team worked exclusively with physical establishments. And do you know why? Because card counting is fundamentally impossible in online casinos. After each hand, the deck is shuffled algorithmically. There are no physical cards to count. There is only a random number generator that creates a new combination every millisecond. MIT Genius was selling a strategy for online blackjack. That's like selling an instruction manual for driving a unicorn. Technically impossible. But the scariest thing I found was in the comments to his posts. Hundreds of people wrote that they had bought the course and were trying out the strategy. Many complained about losses, but the guru explained this by a lack of experience and offered additional modules for a fee. Classic divorce scheme. First sell false hope for $300, then squeeze more money out of those who believed. And then it hit me. The problem is not that people don't know the maths of casinos. The problem is that the industry purposely creates the illusion of winning. Every jackpot, every commercial with a lucky player, every story about a lucky player, it's all part of a big cheating machine. But what exactly is behind the facade of the modern casino? What technology is used to ensure that every player loses? And why even the world's cleverest mathematicians don't stand a chance? The answers to these questions lay in the last part of Vegas' internal document 2016, in a section called, simply, Anatomy of the Modern Home Advantage. What I read there finally convinced me. A modern casino is not a place for gambling. It is a high-tech money-making machine where every detail is calculated with mathematical precision. The section, Anatomy of the Modern House Advantage, in the Vegas Internal Document, 2016, began with a simple statement. Every game in the modern casino is mathematically disadvantageous to the player, no exceptions. But what followed were numbers that gave me goosebumps. Slot machines, the most lucrative segment of casinos, are set to return 80 to 98% of the money placed to players. Sounds good, doesn't it? But here's the catch. These percentages are designed for millions of spins, and the average player makes from 100 to 1,000 spins per session. Imagine. The machine is set to return 95%, but the algorithm can safely swallow $10,000 in a row and then give a jackpot of $15,000. Mathematically, the casino returned 105%, but 99 out of 100 players left with nothing. The document gave an example of a particular Wheel of Fortune machine at the Bellagio Casino. In 24 hours, $2,300,000 passed through it. The players got back $2,087,000. The house advantage was 9.3%. But here's what was striking. Out of 1,200 players who played this machine in a day, only 43 people walked away with a profit. 43 out of 1,200. The rest lost money, and the casino was still in the plus $213,000 in one day from one machine. As I read on, I realized modern slot machines are not just random number generators. They are sophisticated psychological machines set up to maximize money-making. In the section Programming False Matches, the technology of almost winning was described. The machines are specially programmed to show winning combinations just above or below the center line. 3 sevens in a row, but one a line higher. 2 jackpots in a row, but the third symbol fell one position short. The player's brain perceives this as almost winning and demands to continue. Dopamine release occurs even when losing. The person literally enjoys losing money. The paper cited the results of neurobiological studies. MRI scans of the player's brain showed that the same areas activated during almost winning as during real winning. The pleasure zone lights up even when a person loses. But the creepiest thing I found was in the average length of playing sessions table. Beginners played an average of 40 minutes, experienced players 3 hours, and those who were called problem players in the document an average of 8 hours in a row. 8 hours. Imagine a man who presses a button for 8 hours straight, giving the machine his money, without a meal break, sometimes without even going to the loo. And casinos know this. Moreover, they deliberately create conditions for the formation of addiction. The environmental psychology section described the methods casinos use to manage player behavior. I've already mentioned the lack of clocks and windows, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Every 20 minutes, a mixture of scents is sprayed through the ventilation system to stimulate the area of the brain responsible for risk-taking. The temperature is kept at 21 degrees, which is the temperature at which people make the most impulsive decisions. The sound background is no accident either. The frequency of 440 hertz stimulates the production of serotonin. The player feels happy and relaxed even when he loses. The lighting is adjusted to suppress melatonin production. The person does not feel tired and can play significantly longer than under normal conditions. But technology goes even further. The same document mentioned a system codenamed Player Behavior Analysis System. Every player who uses a casino loyalty card goes into a database with a detailed analysis of his behavior. The system tracks how much time a player spends at each type of machine, what kind of bets he makes, what time he comes and goes, how he reacts to wins and losses. Even the speed of button pressing is analyzed. Based on this data, the algorithm predicts when a player is ready to spend more money and when he is going to leave, and adjusts the behavior of the machines accordingly. Ready to quit after a series of losses? The machine will give out a small winnings to get you hooked on continuing the game. Fascinated and playing for several hours, the system can arrange a series of almost wins to force you to increase your bets. The man does not even suspect that he is not playing against chance, but against a supercomputer that analyzes his every move and corrects the game in real time. And this applies not only to slot machines. Even honest games like roulette have their secrets. The paper referred to roulette defect detection technology. Modern roulette wheels are equipped with sensors that monitor each spin. If the system detects that some numbers are falling out more often than others due to physical defects in the wheel, the equipment is automatically replaced. Remember the story of Joseph Jagger, who in 1873 won a fortune by finding an unbalanced wheel in Monte Carlo? Modern technology eliminates this possibility completely, but the most horrifying discovery awaited me in the last part of the document. In the section called The Economics of Dependency, it said in black and white, 73% of the profits of modern casinos come from players with signs of addiction. The industry's strategy is not to entertain customers, but to create and maintain gambling addiction. 73%. Nearly 3/4 of all casino revenue is money from people who are sick, who have no control over their actions, who are ready to spend their last money, borrow from friends, take out a loan, just to keep on gambling. And it is these people that the entire modern casino industry is aimed at. Not those who want to have fun for a modest amount of money. It's those who are willing to lose everything. But how exactly does addiction form? What psychological hooks do casinos use to turn an ordinary person into a mindless, money-losing machine? And is there any way to protect yourself from these manipulations? The answers to these questions were even more shocking than anything I had learned before. The last pages of the document contained what the researchers called the cycle of capture, a step-by-step description of how an ordinary person turns into an addicted player. As I read this diagram, I realized this is no accident. This is a carefully planned psychological operation. Stage 1, the honey trap. The newcomer is given a win. Not immediately, not a lot, but enough to taste victory. Algorithms of modern casinos are specially set up so that new players in the first few sessions to stay in the plus, or at least in the zero. The document cited a statistic. 84% of newcomers win or keep their money on their first visit to the casino. But on the second visit, this percentage drops to 61%, on the third to 37%, and after the 10th visit in the plus remain only 11% of players. Stage 2, emotional swing. The system begins to alternate wins and losses in an unpredictable order. It is this unpredictability that creates drug addiction. The brain cannot calculate the regularity and demands to continue the game. Stage 3, escalation of bets. When a person is already hooked on emotional swings, the system starts pushing to increase bets. Small wins cease to bring the same pleasure. You need more risk, more adrenaline. Stage 4, the wagering trap, the most destructive. When a player loses a large amount of money, the brain switches on the must-win-back mode. Logic is completely switched off. A person is ready to bet everything just to get back what he lost. After reading this, I decided to find a real story of a person who went through all these stages. And after a few days of searching in the archives of forums on fighting game addiction, I found a post that turned my understanding of the problem upside down. The author signed himself simply as Sergey. The story he told was a living illustration of the capture cycle from the document. Started playing online slots out of curiosity, he wrote. A friend sent a link to a casino with a bonus for beginners. The first 2 days I even won. Raised a few $dozen. Classic first step. The honey trap worked perfectly. Then the swing started. I'd win 1,000 or lose 1,500, but the overall balance remained plus. I thought I understood the system, that I'd learnt to sense when the machine was ready to give money. Stage 2. Illusion of control and understanding of the system. After a month, small bets stopped giving me a thrill. I started betting 500, 1,000 per spin. When I won, the euphoria was unbelievable, but losing became painful. Third phase. Escalation of stakes. Further on, Sergei's story became more and more terrifying. He told me how he had started hiding his losses from his wife, how he took out loans and borrowed from friends, making up false excuses, how he gradually increased his bets, trying to recoup his previous losses. The worst part is that logic completely shuts down, he wrote. I realized I was losing, but my brain kept saying, one more bet and you'll win it back. That thought kept me on my toes. The fourth stage is in the clear, the wagering trap. But the creepiest part of his story concerned the final stage. In the end, I embezzled money from the charity organization's client and took money from my grandmother, justifying myself by saying, I'll pay it all back. Sergei lost his flat, got divorced, ruined his relationship with his father, but even after that he continued to play. Reading this story, I realized Sergei went through all the stages of the capture cycle with mathematical precision, but the scariest part was at the end of his post. You see, even now, after writing all this, I have the thought in my head, what if I try again? Maybe this time I'll get lucky. Even realizing the problem, even understanding the addiction mechanism, the brain kept demanding the game to continue. I decided to explore the scientific literature on gambling addiction and found a study by Dr. Anna Geldof from the University of Cambridge. In her paper, The Neurobiology of Pathological Gambling, the results of MRI brain scans of addicted gamblers were presented. People with gambling addiction had the same brain changes as drug addicts. The reward system was damaged. Ordinary pleasures, food, socializing, hobbies, were no longer pleasurable. Only gambling could trigger the release of dopamine. But unlike drugs, slot machines were legal and available 24 hours a day. Digging further into the archives, I found internal documents from a major online casino chain. There were instructions for customer service that made me cringe. When asking a player to block an account due to game control issues, suggest a cooling off period instead of a permanent lockout. Emphasize the temporary nature of the measure. Offer bonuses for returning after the cooling off period. The person asks for help, admits addiction, and the casino offers not a solution to the problem, but a temporary pause followed by a return. In the same documents were descriptions of player retention techniques. Create technical delays when attempting to withdraw a large amount. Offer exclusive bonuses to continue playing instead of withdrawing funds. Use personal managers to deal with VIP clients prone to big spending. The system was designed to make it easy for money to come in, but hard to come out. Every step was designed to make the player spend more and play longer. But the most interesting thing I found was in the profiling problem players section. Casinos not only knew about the existence of addicted customers, they actively identified and exploited them. The algorithms track signs of addictive behavior, playing at night, sharp increases in bets after losses, long sessions without breaks, attempts to win back after large losses. And instead of offering help, the system took such players under special control. They were offered personal bonuses, higher limits, invitations to exclusive tournaments, 73% of profits from sick people. Now I understood how this monstrous statistic was achieved, but the big question remained: if modern casinos are such perfect money-grubbing machines, what happens to those who do try to beat them? What happened to the followers of the MIT team? And do people still exist today who still believe they can beat the system? The answers to these questions led me to the darkest corners of the modern gambling industry. Remember MIT genius with his secret strategy for $300? Determined to see this investigation through to the end, I bought his course after all. What I got for my money finally convinced me. The modern casino training industry is a parasite that feeds on other people's illusions. The course turned out to be a collection of classic strategies that didn't work back in the days of the dinosaurs. Martingale strategy, doubling the bet after every loss. The genius promised that sooner or later the winnings would cover all losses. But he forgot to mention two nuances: table limits and bankroll size. After 7 losses in a row, the bet exceeds 128 times the original amount. If you bet $1, you have to bet 128. You bet 100 quid, you have to bet 13,000. And casinos limit the maximum bet just to protect against martingale. The Fibonacci system, betting on the famous sequence, ostensibly mathematically sound. In fact, it is the same as martingale, only slower, leading to ruin. The favorite number strategy is betting on the same number in roulette. MIT genius claimed that the law of large numbers guarantees a fallout. Bullshit. Each spin is independent of previous spins. A number may not even fall out 1,000 times in a row. But the most interesting was a section on bankroll management. The author advised to never bet more than 5% of the pot, but promise to double the capital in a month. Simple maths. To double your bankroll by betting a maximum of 5%, you need to win 20 games in a row. The probability of this happening at roulette is 1 in a million. Having studied dozens of such courses, both paid and free, I realized they all exploit the same psychological mechanism. People are willing to pay for the illusion of control over randomness, for the belief that there is a secret knowledge that will allow you to outwit mathematics. But then I came across something strange. On one closed forum for professional players, they discussed a certain Victor L. from Minsk, who allegedly systematically wins at online roulette for 2 years already. They gave screenshots, amounts, dates. Intrigued, I started digging and discovered an amazing story. Victor was indeed winning, but not through strategy or luck. He found a vulnerability in the random number generator of one of the casinos. The algorithm was not random enough. Under certain conditions, the sequence repeated itself. Victor wrote a program that predicted the results with 70% accuracy. In 8 months, he had won $137,000. It seemed that here he was, a man who had really beaten the system in the 21st century. But on the 17th of March, 2023, his account was blocked. Reason: software violation. All winnings canceled. Deposit forfeited. And a week later, the casino released an update that fixed a vulnerability in the generator. Victor's story became for me a symbol of modern reality. Even if you find a loophole in the system, the industry will close it instantly. Modern casinos are not the gambling houses of the 19th century. They are high-tech corporations with armies of programmers analysts, and security specialists. But the most frightening discovery awaited me at the end of the investigation. Studying the statistics of online casinos for the year 2024, I discovered the market is growing exponentially. Dozens of new platforms appear every month. Most of them are without licenses, without control, without tools to protect players. Unlike legal casinos, which at least formally care about players, illegal platforms work on the principle of squeeze the maximum and disappear. They purposefully hunt for addicted players, do not pay out large winnings, and disappear with clients' money. Worst of all, artificial intelligence is starting to change the rules of the game. Modern AI analyses each player's behavior in real time and adjusts algorithms to maximize losses. Whereas casinos used to rely on big number statistics, now they can personally adjust the luck of each client. Imagine, the algorithm knows that you are willing to spend a maximum of $5,000 per session. It will let you win $4,000 to give you a thrill, and then take all $5,000. Personalized ruin. And so, we can move on to the conclusions. My investigation has shown it is impossible to beat a modern casino. The MIT team worked in the unique environment of the 80s and 90s. Physical casinos, primitive security systems, imperfect algorithms. Today, every loophole is closed, every method is known and blocked automatically. All win-win strategies are mathematical rubbish. All training courses, a scam for money. All stories about successful players are either lies or temporary luck that ended in complete ruin. The modern casino is not a place of entertainment. It is an industrialized money-making machine that uses the latest advances in psychology, neurobiology, and artificial intelligence against the player. 73% of profits from sick people. This is not a gambling business. It is exploitation of human weaknesses on an industrial scale. Remember, the only way to win at a casino is not to gamble at all. And now, an interactive question for you viewers. Have you or your acquaintances faced with addiction? Have you tried win-win strategies? Tell your stories in the comments. Your experience may warn others from the same mistake. Sometimes an honest life story is more powerful than any statistics. And remember Sergey's words from my investigation: to recognize that getting even is not possible is an opportunity to not play at all. Gambling addiction, especially online gambling, is extremely dangerous to your financial situation and mental health. If you or a loved one is suffering from gambling addiction, seek professional help. As always, you're Mr. Dark Web. See you in the next issues. $400,000 in one night. In 1994, Foxwoods Casino Security recorded the biggest blackjack win. The player disappeared without breaking any state laws. 2 months later, a similar story was repeated in Las Vegas, then Atlantic City. The casinos realized they were at war. 3 months ago, I was digging through the archives, researching classic casino robberies. You know, the standard pattern. Guys with guns burst in through the main entrance, threaten the cashiers, fill bags with money, and drive off in stolen cars. Hollywood classics. But in the course of my search, I stumbled across something strange. On one half-forgotten forum dedicated to casino security, the moderator was discussing the biggest heist in Nevada history, only without a single shot fired. No masks or threats. What's more, technically, It wasn't even a robbery. "These bastards stole more money than all the armed gangs combined," he wrote, "and there was nothing we could do about it because they didn't break any laws." Really? Steal millions without breaking the law? Sounds crazy, but curiosity got the best of me, so I started digging deeper. Late last night, while reviewing declassified documents from the Nevada Gaming Commission, I found mention of the mysterious MIT watch list. 23 names. All are MIT students and alumni. All are banned from entering America's largest casinos. The reason for the ban made me reread the document 3 times. Suspicion of using advanced mathematical techniques to gain an unfair advantage in blackjack. Maths? Do maths get people banned from casinos? What nonsense is that? I decided to find some information on these people. I started by searching for the name William Kaplan in connection with MIT and casinos. The first results led me down a rabbit hole of old newspaper archives and half-forgotten websites. On one forum dedicated to the history of gambling, I found a discussion of the legend of mathematicians from MIT. Most commenters considered it an urban legend, but one user left a link to a Boston Globe article from the year 1999 with the headline, "MIT Students Turn Blackjack into Science." The article was short but intriguing. The journalist wrote about a group of students who use complex mathematical calculations to gain an advantage in casinos. One Bill Kaplan was mentioned as the organizer, but details were scarce. Digging further, I came across the archives of the Las Vegas Review-Journal, an article from 1993. Mystery investment firm closes after making millions in profits. The firm was called Strategic Investments. The principal was William Kaplan. Bill K. from the casino blacklist, the William Kaplan of the newspapers. The coincidence was starting to look too strange. At the end of the article, the journalist mentioned that the company specialized in high-risk mathematical strategies and that most of the employees were MIT graduates. The same 23 names from the watch list. I found Strategic Investments liquidation documents on the website. Dry numbers and dates, but one detail stood out. The company had delivered returns that exceeded those of most Wall Street hedge funds over the 3 years of its existence. The puzzle was starting to come together. But what I discovered next made me question my own sanity. Because according to the documents I found, this group of students hadn't just beaten the casino, they had turned blackjack into a perfectly fine-tuned money-printing machine. And their secret wasn't luck or good fortune, but something far more dangerous to the entire gambling industry. At first, I didn't believe it. A group of students beat the biggest casinos in the world using maths? Really? Casinos spend billions to ensure that every game is guaranteed to make them a profit. Every machine, every table, every roulette wheel is set up so that the money flows in one direction, into the pockets of the establishment. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized. Perhaps there is one game after all, where maths can work against the casino. It all started with a book. In the archives of MIT, I found a reference to Professor Edward Thorp's work, To Defeat the Dealer, published in 1962nd year. In the description, I will leave a link to the material where this system and Thorp's book itself are discussed in detail. Thorpe was no ordinary professor. He specialized in probability theory and mathematical analysis. His idea sounded revolutionary. Casinos can be beaten. It seemed crazy at first. After all, everyone knows that casino always wins. But Thorpe proved something amazing. Blackjack is fundamentally different from all other gambling games. Take a roulette wheel. Each spin of the wheel is independent of the previous spin. It doesn't matter if red falls out 10 times in a row. The probability of black falling out on the next spin is exactly the same, 47.6% in European roulette. Always. It's the same with slot machines. Each button press is a separate random event. Previous results have no effect on future results. But blackjack is a completely different story. In blackjack, cards are not returned to the deck after being dealt. If 4 aces are dealt, there are no more aces in the remaining cards. If many small cards are dealt, there are more large cards in the deck. Blackjack is a memory game, and that's where the fun part comes in. Thorpe calculated that with a perfect basic strategy, the mathematical advantage of the casino in blackjack is less than 0.5%. This is negligible compared to other games. In roulette, the house advantage is 2.7%. In slot machines, it is between 5 and 15%, but 0.5% is still a casino advantage. How do you reverse it? The answer lay in the card count. Think of the deck as a living organism that is constantly changing. Each card dealt changes the composition of the remaining cards and, consequently, the probabilities. The big cards, tens, jacks, queens, kings, and aces, are favorable to the player. Small cards, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, are favorable to the dealer. Why? The dealer is required to pick up cards up to 17 points. If there are many small cards in the deck, the dealer is less likely to overcall. If there are many large cards, the dealer is more likely to get 21 or overcall. Thorpe created a counting system that tracked the ratio of large to small cards in real time. Small cards were assigned a +1, large cards a -1. Neutral cards, 7s, 8s, 9s, were counted as 0. A player mentally keeps score. A 5 is out, +1. A king comes out, -1. If the score is positive, there are more big cards in the deck, and the player gets an advantage. If the score is negative, the casino has the advantage. It looks simple on paper. Thorpe even tested his system in practice, turning $1,000 into $10,000 in a few months. But there was a catch. Counting cards required incredible concentration. You had to simultaneously count each card, memorize the current score, calculate the true score, taking into account the number of decks remaining, make decisions about bets and game actions, all without giving yourself away. Most of the players just didn't get it right. Some were miscounting. Some couldn't vary the stakes properly. Some gave themselves away with strange behavior. But most importantly, even perfect card counting gave an advantage of only 1 or 2%. And in bad conditions, with frequent shuffling, a large number of decks, and betting restrictions, the advantage could drop to 0. A 1 or 2% advantage meant that you needed huge stakes and a huge bankroll to make a serious profit. The average player couldn't afford it. And if he could, he would quickly fall under the suspicion of the casino. It was a vicious circle. The Thorpe system worked in theory, but in practice, most attempts failed. That's why I couldn't understand how the MIT students managed to turn this theory into a machine for making millions. They clearly had some secret that had eluded thousands of other players, something that allowed them to bypass all the limitations of the system and turn a modest mathematical advantage into a constant stream of huge money. And the secret wasn't in the maths. It lay in something much trickier. The more I studied the history of card counting, the more I realized the scale of the problem. Thorpe's system was brilliant in theory, but a nightmare in practice. Lone mathematicians had been trying to get rich for decades, and most had failed. But the MIT students had clearly found a way around all these limitations, and the key lay in one man. Digging through the archives of the Harvard Business Review, I came across a short article from 1978. Harvard graduate William Kaplan had postponed his business school admission to pursue research on mathematical strategies in entertainment. Entertainment? That's an interesting way of putting it. What follows is more. In the Harvard Crimson student newspaper, I found an interview with Kaplan before he left for Las Vegas. The guy spoke openly about his intention to turn Thorpe's theory into a practical business model. When asked by a journalist about the risks, he replied, "Any business has risks, but if you have maths on your side, the risks can be minimized." It sounded cocky, but the result was impressive. In the archives of the Nevada State Internal Revenue Service, I found the return of one W. Kaplan for the year 1978. $35,000 in income, with a starting capital of $1,000, 9 months. But the most interesting thing began later. In May 1980, a small article appeared in the MIT Tech student newspaper, Harvard Graduate Lectures on Practical Applications of Probability Theory. The lecturer was William Kaplan. Coincidence? Not likely. Next, I found something that made me rethink the whole story. In the archives of the Lincoln Laboratory at MIT, I found a report from the year 1979 entitled Computer Modeling of Blackjack Strategies. The author was graduate student J.P. Massar. Massar used the computing power of the mainframe to test Thorpe's theory in millions of simulations. His findings were revolutionary. The system works, but only if there are enough players and coordination between them. The number of players and coordination. Here it is. In the same report, Massar wrote, individual card counting is limited by bankroll size and casino attention, but a team of players can spread the risk and go unnoticed for much longer. Team. Not a lone genius, but a group of people working to a common plan. And that's when the puzzle began to take shape. In the MIT student newspaper of October of 1980, I found an advertisement for an investment club to explore alternative financial strategies. The organizers were Massar and Kaplan, a visiting consultant, but this was no ordinary student association. In the archives of Massachusetts found documents on the registration of an official partnership called MIT Blackjack Team, with the authorized capital of $89,000. $89,000 and $1,980 is serious money. Where did the students get that kind of money? The answer was found in the minutes of the investment club. Kaplan wasn't just sharing his experience. He was demanding a complete reorganization of his approach. No spontaneous trips to the casino, no emotional betting, no amateurishness. "We are not creating a gambling group, but an investment company," his minutes quoted him as saying. "We will have strict procedures, uniform standards, a system of reporting and profit sharing." Kaplan insisted that every member of the team undergo intensive training, not just learning the theory of card counting, but practicing it to the point of automaticity. What's more, they learned to play different roles. And this is where the genius part began. The traditional approach to card counting has been primitive. One player sits at the table, counts cards, and varies bets according to the situation. The problem is that this behavior is too conspicuous. Casinos are quick to spot such players by their characteristic betting pattern. Kaplan proposed a radically different scheme. Divide the process into roles. One person counts the cards but does not change the size of bets. Another receives a signal and makes large bets only in favorable situations. The third person can play the role of a distraction, ingeniously simple and incredibly difficult to detect. In the financial records of the partnership, I found the first results. Within 10 weeks of the team's work in 1,980, the authorized capital had doubled. 89,000 turned into 178,000. Double your money in 10 weeks? Hedge funds could only dream of such results, but that was just the beginning. Because what I discovered about their modus operandi was beyond my wildest expectations. These guys hadn't just learned how to count cards. They had created a whole system of psychological manipulation that made them virtually invisible to casino security. And the amazing thing is that it was all perfectly legal. Now I understood how they managed to remain undetected. The roll system was ingenious, but the devil was in the details, and the more I dug into the documents, the more I admired the sophistication of their approach. In materials related to the MIT Blackjack team's training, I came across descriptions of their internal training program. The descriptions of the training said that it was not just a card-counting course. Players learned how to behave at the table so that their actions looked natural to others. They practiced their roles from quiet observer to confident big player, and rehearsed how to communicate the right signals without words or unnecessary movements. Each newcomer had to learn 3 basic roles. The first is the observer, the most inconspicuous but critical position. The observer sat down at the table, made minimal bets, $5 to $10, and silently counted cards. No sudden changes in behavior, no big bets. Just a regular player who loses small amounts of money. But when the score became positive, when the deck had accumulated large cards, the observer signaled. This is where the most interesting part began. In the training protocols, I found a description of a signaling system that looked more like a spy code. Arms crossed on the chest meant warm deck, counting +2 or 3. Hands behind the back, hot deck, +4 and above. Rubbing the nose, very hot deck, +6 or more, but these were only visual cues. Code words disguised as ordinary conversation were used to transmit the exact count. I think we should order a cocktail, meant a count of +4. Shall we go out to dinner? +6. I have to get up early tomorrow, +8. Just a normal conversation at the gaming table that didn't raise any suspicions. At the signal of the observer, the second role, the big player, entered the game. In the training materials, they were called in different ways. Sometimes gorillas, sometimes controllers. The essence was the same, a person who appeared at the table only when maths was on the team's side. The big player would get a signal from the observer and approach the table with words like, "Oh, blackjack, can I join you?" He'd sit down and immediately start making big bets, $100, $200, $500 a hand. For the casino, it looked completely natural. A rich player decided to try his luck at a hot table. There was no connection with the quiet guy who had been sitting there for half an hour, betting a tenner each. But the most brilliant thing was the psychology. The big players weren't just betting, they were playing a role. The role of the slightly drunken rich man who throws money around. The role of the naive tourist who feels lucky today. The role of the self-confident businessman who is used to taking risks. In the team's reports, I found a description of one such character. A guy named Jeff played the role of the golden boy, the son of rich parents who spends his daddy's money. He wore expensive watches, ordered champagne, tipped generously, and behaved as if money meant nothing to him. On the first night, this golden boy won $2,500. In a few hours of one night, $25,000. $25,000 for one night? In the 1980s, that was the average American salary for 6 months. But the team didn't stop there. By the mid-80s, their operations had reached industrial scale. There have been trips that brought in $190,000 a weekend. $190,000 for 2 days of work. Ben Mesrich's book, Blowing Up Vegas, describes perhaps the team's most stunning success. A series of games at the Desert Inn, which, according to the author, brought them over $1.5 million in a matter of days. Mesrich writes that casino security officials, noticing unusually large blackjack winnings, launched an internal investigation to try to understand what was going on at their tables. The numbers were adding up. But how did they do it? The answer was found in the team's work protocols. By the late 80s, they had perfected their system. Large operations involve 15 to 20 people at a time. A few observers at different tables, a few big players, coordinators who kept an eye on the big picture. Moreover, they learned how to work with several casinos at the same time. While one group played at Caesar's Palace, another worked at MGM Grand, and the third at Mirage. Reports mention that at the peak of activity, the team could shoot more than $400,000 in one weekend, working in different establishments in Las Vegas and Atlantic City. $20 million a year. And all with the help of maths and acting. But here a logical question arose. Were the casino security services really that naive? Didn't anyone notice that something strange was going on? Of course they did. And what I discovered about the confrontation between the MIT team and the casino industry was as fascinating as the money-making scheme itself. Because the casinos weren't going down without a fight, and a real war of wits ensued. The thing is, casino founders aren't stupid. They know that every dollar of profit is built on a mathematical advantage, and when someone starts systematically winning large sums, it's not luck. It's a threat to the entire business model. Digging through the security archives of various casinos, I discovered that the war against the MIT team didn't start immediately. At first, they were perceived as ordinary lucky people. But when the winnings became regular and the amounts astronomical, the industry sounded the alarm. An internal MGM Grand Memorandum for the year 1987 stated, "During the past 6 months, we have recorded anomalous blackjack winnings totaling over $800,000. The players are not visibly related, but statistical analysis shows patterns that cannot be explained by chance. 800 grand in 6 months at the MGM Grand alone, and that's just what they noticed." The security services began sharing information. The real war has begun. The first line of defense was the dealers. They paid attention to players who dramatically increased bets in the middle or end of the deck. They kept an eye out for those who thought too long before making decisions. They immediately reported any suspicious players to a supervisor. But the MIT team was too good for such primitive detection methods. Their role system made individual patterns virtually invisible. Then the casinos moved on to more serious measures. Griffin Investigations, a detective agency specializing in casino problems, has created databases of unwanted players with photos and detailed descriptions. In the year 1989, this database was called the Black Book, not an official government document, but a private register exchanged between casinos. It included not only cheaters and crooks, but also legitimate players whose methods the casinos considered undesirable. The MIT team has been dubbed the dinosaurs. Why dinosaurs? It is still unclear. By 1999, 18 members of the MIT team were already in the Black Book. Their pictures were hanging in the surveillance rooms of the largest casinos in America. But that was just the beginning of the technology war. In the financial records of Scientific Games Corporation, a company that manufactured casino equipment, there is an order for new generation automatic shuffling machines. The cost per machine is $45,000. The order is for 300 units. 300 automatic shufflers at $45,000 each. $13.5 million to fight a handful of students. These machines shuffled the cards after each hand, making counting impossible. But they had a serious drawback. They slowed down the game, which reduced the casino's profits. So most establishments took a different route. Instead of using one deck, they began to use 6 or 8 decks at a time. This did not eliminate counting completely, but made it much more difficult. The MIT team adapted. They developed advanced counting systems for multi-deck games and methods for determining depth of penetration. Casinos have tightened their response. Caesar's Palace implemented an early shuffle procedure when card counting is suspected. Dealers were given the right to shuffle the deck at any time without explanation. But the most effective weapon has been video surveillance. The system was called Eye in the Sky, at a cost of $2 million. It included 48 high-resolution cameras, computerized facial recognition, and automatic tracking of suspicious behavior. 48 cameras per casino. In 1990, that was fantastic. The system worked simply. As soon as a dinosaur appeared in the casino, the computer automatically alerted the security service. Within a minute, a security officer approached the player with a polite request to leave the establishment. By the year 1991, the situation had become critical. The team tried to find workarounds. They started using professional makeup, changed hairstyles, wore contact lenses of different colors. Even plastic surgery is mentioned. One of the players changed the shape of his nose to fool the facial recognition system. But technology has evolved faster than camouflage techniques. In 1992, the thing the team dreaded most happened. At Foxwoods Casino, the same casino where they had once won $400,000 in one night, an incident occurred that changed everything. Jeff, the golden boy, was identified by security 20 minutes after entering the casino. But instead of the usual request to leave the establishment, he was taken to a separate room. Backrooming was the name of the procedure. The player was isolated, photographed from all angles, fingerprinted, and had a so-called educational conversation. Formally, it was not an arrest, but in essence, psychological pressure. He was held in an isolation room at Foxwoods Casino for 4 hours without being charged. According to a casino spokesman, he is suspected of fraud, but no evidence was provided. 4 hours, no charges, no lawyer. It was a signal. Casinos showed that they were ready to use any methods, even those on the edge of the law. After the Foxwoods incident, many team members began to have doubts. In 1993, the Las Vegas Review-Journal published an article with a pithy headline, "End of an Era. Mysterious Investment Company Closes Fund." It was about strategic investments. But what exactly made William Kaplan decide to shut down the most profitable enterprise in the history of gambling? What broke the team that seemed invincible? And why did the $1 million machine stop exactly in 1993? The answers to these questions were much more complicated than I expected. By the year 1993, the perfect money printing machine began to fail in a major way. The backroom incident at Foxwoods was a turning point. But it wasn't just psychological pressure that was undermining the foundations of the MIT empire. The very mathematics that had once worked in their favor was beginning to turn against them. By the early 90s, the team had grown to several dozen people. Too many people knew about the system. Too many faces were in the casino databases. And most importantly, the profits had to be divided among more and more participants. William Kaplan faced the classic problem of any successful business. Scaling up was killing efficiency. The same $400,000 per weekend that once seemed fantastic was now divided between 20 or 30 people. Each participant's share was shrinking, and the risks were only growing. Other factors came into play. By the 90s, casino technology had reached such a level that facial recognition systems worked almost without error. Any dinosaur was identified within minutes of entering the establishment. Moreover, casinos started to coordinate their actions on a national level. Blacklists were updated in real time. A player spotted in Las Vegas in the morning was already persona non grata in Atlantic City by the evening. Foxwoods became the symbol of the end. It was there that the security systems reached such perfection that even the team's best players could not work for more than a few hours without detection. In 1993, Kaplan made the inevitable decision. Strategic Investments was officially liquidated. The team gradually disintegrated. Some went into traditional finance, applying the same analytical skills to Wall Street. Some founded technology companies. Many became successful businessmen, using the risk management experience gained at the gaming tables. Jeff, the golden boy, became a strategic planning consultant. Massar went into venture capital investment. Kaplan himself founded several successful healthcare companies. The story of the MIT team could have remained a legend, known only to a narrow circle of professional players. But in 2003, Ben Mesrich's book was published, which turned it into a bestseller. And in 2008 the book was made into a film, 21, with Kevin Spacey. However, Hollywood, as usual, embellished reality. In the film, the MIT team looked like a group of rebels fighting against the system. In reality, they were disciplined mathematicians who turned a game of chance into an exact science. This is the story of the MIT blackjack team. I will leave all the sources for this case in the description to the video. This story proves sometimes the most sophisticated schemes work not because of deception or breaking the law, but because of knowledge and discipline. Maths versus luck. Brains against the system. And who knows how many more such stories are hiding in the archives of the internet, waiting for their researcher. As always, your Mr. Dark Web. $36 million in one night. A heist like this should have rocked the world, but you probably haven't even heard of it. The story happened a few years ago, in the early 2000s, and while it made noise in cybersecurity and cryptocurrency circles, it never made the headlines. It was deemed too complicated, too technical. It was relegated to a couple of paragraphs in a news item and forgotten. But I hadn't forgotten. When I first came across the details of this case, I realized that what I had in front of me was not just another heist. This was the perfect digital heist scenario, executed with such audacity that it seemed like fiction. And the deeper I delved, the clearer I realized that behind the dry facts was an incredible story of psychology, technology, and one small mistake that ruined everything. It all started with a technology that most people don't even think about. The SIM card in your phone. We used to think of it as the key to our digital life. It's where you get codes from banks, social media confirmations, and email passwords. Now imagine that someone could just call your mobile operator and, pretending to be you, intercept this key. That's SIM swapping. An attack built not on breaking code, but on breaking the most trusted element of any system, a human being. It was this vulnerability that our protagonist turned into a weapon. Official records list him simply as an Ontario teenager. He's perfected the art of SIM swapping. He didn't just trick support staff. He spent weeks researching his victims, piecing together their personal information from dozens of old data leaks. He knew their mother's maiden name, the name of their first dog, and the last 4 digits of their credit card number. He approached each call like an actor preparing for a major role in his life. And when the employee on the other end of the line finally said, "Yes, sir, I'm switching your number to a new SIM card," the game was over. In a matter of minutes, this teenager would gain complete control over the victim's digital life, empty their accounts, and disappear. It was a well-oiled, almost perfect scheme. And at first, like everyone else, I was focused on the main event, the theft of 36 million. I was studying its anatomy, trying to understand how he managed to bypass the defenses of a purse of that level. But in the course of my investigation, going through the archives of old hacker forums and encrypted chat rooms, I came across something more interesting. I saw footprints, barely visible digital crumbs that this man had been leaving long before his main case. They were discussions of techniques, pen tests, petty attacks that no one had ever written about, and I realized that the 36 million heist was not the spontaneous luck of a lone genius. It was a culmination, the final exam. And before that, there had been long and hard preparation. That's when my investigation really began. I was no longer interested in just one theft, even if it was the biggest. A whole panorama opened up in front of me, and the big question changed. How many more victims were there that we don't know about? And how deep does this rabbit hole really go? So, I had a new question. If the $36 million robbery was a final exam, where was this teenager trained? I decided to go back in time and dive into the digital archives of the late 2018-19 years. My goal was not to find the hacker himself, but his shadow, his early traces. I was looking for evidence of attacks that were too small to make the news, but bore his unique handwriting. It was a hunt in a veritable digital forest, overgrown with dead forums and abandoned chat rooms. My first point was the archive of an old hacker forum that was known for its social engineering section. It was the place where deception theory turned into practice. I spent several nights sifting through hundreds of pages of discussion. I wasn't looking for bragging rights or ready-made instructions. I was looking for questions. A newbie who wants to learn always gives himself away with questions. And I found him. A user with a long-deleted account, whose posts survived only in quotes from other people. He wasn't asking how to hack. His questions were much more subtle. What is AT&T's exact verification protocol if a customer has lost both their phone and passport? Does a basic level support employee have access to a customer's SIM card change history? What code word is most likely to cause an operator to transfer a call to a senior manager? This anonymous guy wasn't studying the technology. He was studying the system. He was looking for cracks not in the code, but in human psychology and corporate guidelines. He dissected the bureaucratic machine to understand which levers to push. It was his MO. And now, knowing him, I started looking for victims. I switched to other archives, gaming forums and old Reddit threads, and the picture started to become clearer. I found a wave of complaints dating back to around the same time. Dozens of users told the same story. Their phone would suddenly lose connection, and an hour later they'd find they'd lost access to their Steam or social media game account with a rare, so-called OG nickname. These were the original short nicknames registered at the dawn of the internet. To the average person, just a set of letters. But on the black market, such nicknames were worth thousands and sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. These were his first forays. He honed his skills on gamers. He wasn't chasing big money. He was practicing the methodology and building up his startup capital. Victims contacted tech support, but they could rarely be helped. For large corporations, these were minor incidents, a statistical error. For him, it was a school, a baptism of fire. In these complaints, I saw his style. The attacks were fast, ruthless, and left little trace except for the bewildered former account holder. A few months passed and his goals changed. I found it in discussions on forums dedicated to cryptocurrency. People started telling similar stories, but now it wasn't about nicknames. It was about money. Small amounts of money at first. $1,000, $5, $10. The victims were newcomers who kept all their savings in stock exchange wallets and didn't use sophisticated security methods. The scheme was the same. A call to a mobile operator, interception of the SIM card, resetting the password via SMS, and instant withdrawal of all funds. This is where I first saw his cold-bloodedness. In one of the posts, the victim described that the hacker, after gaining access to his email, did not immediately steal the money. He waited 3 days, just sat and watched his correspondence, studied his life. And then, on Saturday night, when the victim was away from home and couldn't react quickly, he struck. This wasn't just a break-in, it was a hunt. He relished his power, his complete control over another person's digital life. He was a predator playing with his prey before the final bite. I sat in front of the screen and put these fragments into a single picture. There was an evolution unfolding in front of me. From petty theft of digital valuables to serious financial attacks. Each successful hack made him more confident, more brazen. He improved his methods, learned how to cover his tracks and target richer victims. He was transforming himself from a simple con man into a serial robber. He was building his invisible empire while remaining an ordinary teenager to the world. And so, while studying his last known post on that old hacker forum, I saw a turning point. After months of silence, he asked his last question in a track dedicated to crypto wallet security. The question was short and frightening in its simplicity. What exchanges and custodial services do managers operating 8-digit sums use? 8-figure sums, tens of millions of dollars. At that moment, he was no longer a small predator. He had learnt the habits of his prey, gained strength, and was now ready to go out to hunt a real whale. Practice was over. He was preparing for the biggest job of his life. The question about 8-figure sums asked on that forum was the last trace he left before he went into the shadows. He was preparing. As I studied the chronology of events, I realized that it took him several months to prepare for this robbery. This was no longer a spontaneous attack on a random target. It was a carefully planned operation aimed at a single individual, and my first task was to understand who the target was and why he was a target. I didn't need to know his name. I needed to understand his archetype. By analyzing blockchain transactions and comparing them to data from old crypto communities, I was able to build a portrait of him. The victim was one of the old guard, an early adopter of cryptocurrencies who believed in the technology when a single Bitcoin was worth less than $1. He amassed his fortune not by trading, but by simple patience. This was a man who was fabulously wealthy in the digital world, yet likely lacked the cybersecurity paranoia of today's crypto millionaires. His defenses were strong, but built on 5-year-old standards. He was the perfect target. A whale who didn't know he was already being watched. The hunt was on. I could almost physically feel this teenager scouring the internet for weeks, gathering a digital portrait of his victim. He'd read his old social media posts, studied interviews he'd given years ago, analyzed his habits. He was a digital stalker, but his real gold was the archives of leaked data, which he no doubt bought on shady forums. In these gigabytes of stolen information, he found everything he needed: old passwords, email addresses, and, most importantly, answers to secret questions. His mother's maiden name, his first school, the name of his favorite dog, all the personal information we thoughtlessly leave online became his arsenal, and then came the day of the attack. I can only imagine what it was like, but the reconstruction of events looks frighteningly realistic. Somewhere in a quiet Ontario suburb sits a teenager with a headset. He's not nervous. He's as calm as a surgeon before surgery. He dials the customer service number of a mobile operator thousands of kilometers away. On the other end of the line, he is answered by a regular clerk, a tired man on minimum wage who acts strictly according to instructions. The play begins. The teenager speaks confidently and calmly. He is a customer who has lost his phone. He gives his name, address, date of birth. The employee asks him to confirm his identity by asking secret questions. And for every question, he gets an instant and accurate answer. Your mother's maiden name? The answer is ready. The model of your first car? The answer is ready. The support employee doesn't have a shadow of a doubt. The customer has been verified. A teenager asks to switch the number to a new SIM card, which he allegedly just bought. The employee fulfills the request, one click of the mouse. At that moment, the phone of the real owner of the number in the U.S. loses the network, and full control over his digital life passes into the hands of the hacker. A race against the clock begins. Once the victim's old SIM card is switched off, the teenager has only a few hours until he realizes what has happened and takes action. But he doesn't need hours. He needs minutes. He immediately uses his phone number to reset the password to the victim's main email account. The confirmation code comes to him by text message. Once he has access to the mail, he has the keys to everything. He logs into his crypto exchange account, resets the password, goes through two-factor authentication, and sees the balance in front of him. $36 million. He doesn't hesitate for a second. In one move, he transfers the entire amount to a pre-prepared anonymous wallet. The transaction goes into the blockchain. A few minutes later, it receives its first confirmation. That's it. The money is gone. It can no longer be recovered. The heist of the century is complete. The perfect crime. I've learnt this machine down to the wire, and the more I admired it, the more I was troubled by one inconsistency. The theft was a work of social engineering. It was one-man theater. But what happened next, after the money arrived at the wallet, was performed in a completely different style. The funds were not lying around. They were immediately broken down into hundreds of pieces and channeled through a sophisticated network of mixers and anonymous wallets. It was a world-class money laundering operation, conducted with an efficiency and speed only available to the entire financial departments of underground syndicates. This was no longer the theater of one actor. It was the work of an orchestra. That's when I first questioned the lone genius story. The M.O. was different. The theft was bold and creative. The laundering was cold, mathematical, and soulless. It was the work of two different people, or more likely a man and a system. The question of my investigation changed again. If the teenager was a brilliant thief, who was the equally brilliant banker who legalized his loot? My theory that someone else was behind the teenager seemed logical, but it remained a theory. After the robbery, the trail went cold. The money dissolved into thousands of transactions, and there was no news for over a year. No arrests, no statements. It seemed the crime really was perfect, and the world would never know who was behind this daring attack. All this time, as I found out later, there was quiet and painstaking work going on behind the scenes. A joint team from the Canadian Police, the FBI, and the U.S. Secret Service was trying to unravel the tangle, but time after time they hit the same wall as I did. The trail ended at the money laundering stage, and then, almost 2 years after the robbery, the perpetrator made a mistake. A single, almost insignificant mistake, born not of greed, but of a feeling that destroys many people: vanity. The teenager who pulled off the heist of the century and became the owner of a fortune in anonymous cryptocurrency felt invulnerable. He was sitting on top of his digital world, and he wanted a trophy. Something that would validate his status not only in his own eyes, but also in the eyes of the tight-knit community he respected. He wanted a rare gaming nickname. The world of online gaming, like the real world, has its luxuries. And OG nicknames, short, one-syllable names registered at the dawn of the gaming era, are as much a status symbol as an expensive watch or supercar. Our hacker, who started his career by stealing such nicknames, decided he could now afford to buy the best one. He found the owner of the name he needed and negotiated a deal worth tens of thousands of dollars and paid for it with cryptocurrency. It was the click the investigators had been waiting for. All this time they had been monitoring the thousands of wallets involved in the laundering chain. For them, it was a forest of moving trees. And now, one of those trees suddenly extended a branch into the real world. The transaction of a few tens of thousands of dollars was a drop in the ocean of millions stolen, but it was unique. It led not to another anonymous wallet, but to a specific person, the seller of the game nickname. The investigators immediately contacted him. He, of course, provided all of the buyer's information. Through the data on the gaming platform, agents traced the IP address and then the physical address of a house in a suburb of Hamilton, Ontario. The circle was closed. The most complex and intricate financial trail in the history of cybercrime led them to their target through the purchase of a virtual name in a video game. An arrest soon followed. The picture the police caught was surreal. No underground bunker full of servers. Just an ordinary house, an ordinary room, and an ordinary teenager who, according to neighbors, was quiet and polite. The very man who had single-handedly set the intelligence services of two countries on edge turned out to be a genius living under the same roof as his parents. The story got its finale. The news exploded with headlines: "Police arrest teenager who stole 46 million Canadian dollars in cryptocurrency." The official version was plain and simple. A lone genius committed a daring heist, but youthful bravado ruined him. He was caught, most of his assets confiscated. Justice was served. It was the end of the world, the end of history. I thought so too. I had gathered all the facts, built a timeline, and was ready to finish my investigation. All the pieces fit together. All the pieces of the puzzle were in place. But something was bugging me. One small detail that almost everyone else had missed. Revisiting the blockchain data one last time, I looked again at the very transaction for the game nickname, and I saw something that the news reports had overlooked. The wallet he used to pay for the nickname was just one of hundreds of small wallets at the very end of the laundering chain. It received only a tiny fraction of the stolen money, his out-of-pocket expenses. The bulk of it, tens of millions of dollars, never touched that wallet. It continued its journey through the labyrinth and settled in other, hitherto anonymous accounts. The police had caught the thief. There was no doubt about that. But had they caught the banker? Or was this whole ingenious money laundering operation created by someone else? And then a terrifying thought popped into my head. What if catching him wasn't a failure? What if the organization behind him simply sacrificed its top performer to get away from the real money and the real puppeteers? The question that remained after the case was officially closed was, how could a teenager, no matter how brilliant he was, single-handedly pull off such a sophisticated money laundering operation? I decided to dig in the last remaining direction. The environment. The digital underground that had spawned this hacker. I started looking not at him, but at the ecosystem in which he existed. And what I discovered changed the way I looked at this story forever. My first discovery was a concept that cybersecurity experts call crime as a service. The modern Darknet is not just a collection of lone hackers. It's a huge, well-oiled marketplace of services. You don't need to be an expert in everything. You can buy a database with personal information about potential victims from a single vendor. You can order a service to screen a specific person from another. And most importantly, you can hire a professional cryptocurrency laundering service that, for a certain percentage, will run your dirty money through thousands of wallets and return it to you clean. This teenager was not operating in a vacuum. He was part of this ecosystem. While researching the case file, I came across a reference to a forum where he was active. On the surface, it's a community for buying and selling rare nicknames, the very ones he started with. But according to many investigations, this forum had long since become a gray area, a veritable exchange for SIM swappers. Users there openly bragged about their successes and exchange methods. It wasn't like the lair of a lone genius. It was like a hobby club for serial burglars. He didn't invent SIM swapping. He simply perfected methods that were already being actively discussed and practiced in this community. And it is likely that he could have obtained his money laundering services there as well. That would explain the difference in handwriting, creative, artistic hacking, and a cold, systematic legalization process. It may indeed have been the work of different people connected through an anonymous platform. The expert opinion I found in specialized cybersecurity reports only reinforce this theory. Analysts from blockchain research companies have repeatedly stated that the effective laundering of amounts over $1 million almost always indicates the involvement of an organized group. Such groups spend years building their networks of fake wallets and establishing channels to move money out into the real world. It would be virtually impossible for a suburban teenager to build such a system on his own from scratch. And this is where the whole picture comes together. This is not a story about a single genius. This is a story about an incredibly talented performer who found himself in the right place at the right time, inside an already existing criminal infrastructure. He was their best field agent, their most daring and successful operator. He was the perfect facade. The romantic tale of a teenage prodigy distracted attention from the systemic, organized nature of the crime. So was he a loner? Officially, yes. The case is closed, the culprit has been found, but the facts point to something else. They paint a picture where the teenager caught is just the visible part of the iceberg, the tip that was turned in or sacrificed when the investigation got too close. His mistake in buying the nickname allowed the system to shed ballast, giving justice to one player, albeit the most valuable, in order to keep the rest of the structure in the shadows. We'll never know the whole truth, but one thing is certain. The police caught the man who committed the robbery, but the real ghost in this story is not him. The real ghost is the faceless, decentralized system that created him, armed him, and is probably still running right now as you watch this video. So, we can move on to the conclusions. My investigation has shown that the era of lone hackers acting out of interest or fame is irrevocably gone. We live in an era of organized, faceless, and highly commercial cybercrime. All your strong passwords are useless if the link that recovers them is vulnerable. All the stories about elusive geniuses are often just a convenient screen for an entire industry, and the idea that it won't happen to me is the main vulnerability that criminals rely on. The modern Darknet is not just a forum. It's an efficient marketplace where your personal information, from your mother's maiden name to your old passwords, is a tradable commodity. And your phone number isn't just a way to get in touch. It's a universal key that can unlock the door to your entire life. Digital identity theft is no longer something out of a spy film. It's a streamlined business where each of us is just a line in a database of potential targets. Remember, in a world where your phone is the key to a bank safe, the only person who can truly protect it is yourself. And now an interactive question for you viewers. Have you or someone you know ever experienced a social engineering hacking attempt? Have you received strange security calls or suspicious texts? Tell your stories in the comments. Your experience may warn others against making the same mistake. Sometimes an honest life story is more powerful than any statistics. And remember the main lesson of this investigation. The biggest vulnerability in a $36 million security system was not complex software code, but the usual tired tech support person on the other end of the line. Be extra vigilant. Install additional security with your mobile operators. Use sophisticated authenticators instead of SMS, and take your phone number as seriously as your passport. Your digital hygiene is your primary defense. As always, you're Mr. Dark Web. €4.5 billion. That's how much one woman stole in 3 years, using technology that didn't exist. You think pyramid schemes are obsolete? Not at all. They haven't just evolved, they've become indestructible. My name is Mr. Dark Web, and today I'm going to tell you about an investigation that made me rethink everything I knew about financial scams. In the year 2023, in the news on CoinDesk, there was an interesting note. Bulgarian cryptocurrency queen remains on the run. It was about a certain Ruja Ignatova and the OneCoin project. The name didn't say anything, but the damage figure caught my eye. More than €4 billion. I started digging. The first thing I did was to the archives. The Wayback Machine showed that the OneCoin website looked like a typical cryptocurrency exchange. But the deeper I dug into the FBI court documents, the clearer it became. This cryptocurrency had never existed. Documents from the Southern District of New York were in the public domain. I read the indictment. The scheme ran from 2014 to 2017. Victims bought educational packages for which they received OneCoin tokens. Tokens that could not be exchanged, sold, or used anywhere else. Genius? Yes. But what struck me most was that it wasn't exceptional. I started looking for similar cases. Finico, 7 billion rubles in damages. S Group in Ukraine, tens of thousands of victims. Forsage, 300 million worldwide. And that's just what made the news. At 3 in the morning, flipping through SEC reports and reading Bitcoin Talk archives, I realized I wasn't just looking at a series of individual scams. It was an evolution. A new kind of financial predator that had learned to use technology in such a way that the victims themselves became its protectors. But how did we get to this point? How did a scheme that an Italian immigrant invented a century ago in Boston become a global digital threat? To understand this, I had to go back to the very beginnings of pyramid schemes. Charles Ponzi and his postal coupons. Because only after studying the whole chain of evolution, I was able to understand the main thing. What exactly made modern pyramids practically invulnerable? And who is behind the wave of new schemes that is hitting the world right now? As I said, in order to understand this, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to understand who the famous Charles Ponzi was, and more importantly, why he became a famous personality around the world. Boston, 1919. A small office on School Street, number 27. A sign on the door reads, Securities Exchange Company. Inside is an Italian immigrant named Charles Ponzi, and an idea that would change the world of financial fraud forever. While perusing the Boston Globe archives in the digital library, I came across an article from the 27th of July, 1920. The headline was, Ponzi promises $1,500 for every 1,000 in 90 days. The journalist wrote with undisguised skepticism. And he was right. Ponzi promised 50% profit in 45 days. He was allegedly making money from arbitrage of international postal coupons, buying them cheaply in Italy and selling them dearly in America. On paper, the scheme looked legitimate. In reality, postal coupons for such sums simply did not exist. But here's what stuck with me about the police reports. Ponzi was a marketing genius. He didn't just promise profits, he created a stir. He actually paid his first investors the interest he promised. They told their friends, friends told their friends, and so on down the chain. Within 7 months, queues lined up. People brought not only their savings, but also mortgaged their houses and sold their property. At its peak, up to 1,000 people a day came to the Ponzi scheme. 30,000 investors, $40 million. More than $500 million in today's money. The scheme collapsed within a week. One journalist asked a simple question. How many postal coupons do you need to make such a profit? It turned out to be more than existed worldwide. When I read those archives, what struck me was not how Ponzi was deceptive. What struck me was how quickly his scheme spread. No internet, no social media, just word of mouth. And still, within a few months, all of Boston knew about him. Ponzi was essentially the first person in the world to create a pyramid scheme and to define the phrase at all. But the most interesting thing is that he laid down 3 principles that still work today. The first is the promise of super profits with a plausible explanation. The second is actual payouts to the first investors to build trust. The third is using greed and social pressure to grow exponentially. But why do these principles, invented a century ago, work even better today. Digging through the Ponzi case files in the U.S. National Office archives, I found something interesting. In a statement to the investigation, he said, "If I had a way to instantly contact millions of people around the world, I would be richer than any king." Ponzi dreamed of what modern fraudsters have had since birth. A global network capable of delivering a message to billions of people in seconds. But between the Ponzi scheme and the cryptocurrency, Rouge stood another important stage of evolution, a stage that showed how political chaos and economic crisis can turn primitive schemes into a national disaster. And it happened in the Russia of the 90s, where the name of Sergei Mavrodi became synonymous with the largest scale pyramid scheme in the history of mankind. Let's remember the history of Mavrodi and his world-famous company, We Can Do Much, abbreviated MEME. Moscow, February of the year 1994. All the TV channels are running an advert. Every MMM ticket will bring you $200 of income a month. The film shows an ordinary Russian family buying a car with money from MMM shares. Studying the Kommersant investigation materials of those years, I realized Sergei Mavrodi had turned a Ponzi scheme into a national disaster, and he did it using three factors that the Italian swindler did not have. The first is television. Unlike Ponzi, who had to rely on word of mouth, Mavrodi had the ability to reach millions of viewers instantly. MMM's commercials were aired 20 times a day on all the central channels. The advertising budget was $15 million in the first few months alone. The second is political chaos. The year 1993. The shooting of the White House in Moscow. Economic collapse. People lost faith in the state, in banks, in the ruble. Against this backdrop, MMM looked like a salvation. The state has cheated us. The banks are bankrupt, but Mavrodi is paying, was the reasoning of millions. The third is mass financial illiteracy. In the materials of sociological surveys of those years, I found a shocking statistic. 80% of Russians did not understand what shares were. 70% did not understand what dividends were. MMM was not selling shares in the legal sense, but simple tickets with the promise of redemption at a rising price. The result exceeded all expectations. By the summer of 1994, 10 to 15 million people had invested in MMM. Imagine, every 10th resident of Russia. The amount of deposits, according to various estimates, from 40 to 80 trillion non-denominated rubles. But what struck me most of all in the archive materials was not the scale, but the psychology. When MMM stopped paying out money in July of the 94th, people did not demand a refund. They demanded the resumption of the pyramid scheme. In August, thousands of depositors came to the MMM office on Varshavskoye Shosсе, with placards reading, "We believe Mavrodi" and "Save MMM." Reading Izvestia reports of those days, I realized that Mavrodi had achieved what Ponzi had dreamed of. He had turned the victims into fanatically devoted allies. Moreover, in December 1995, Mavrodi was elected to the State Duma on the anti-government wave. His slogan, "The state destroyed MMM, I will restore justice." Genius? Absolutely. But the most interesting thing started later. In 2011, when Mavrodi launched MMM 2011, this time through the internet. And here there was a qualitative leap in the evolution of pyramids. Studying the case files in the archives of the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs, I discovered the new MMM was operating in 30 countries at the same time, from India to Nigeria. The victims themselves transferred money to each other via web money and Bitcoin. There was no central account. The funds circulated directly between the participants. It was a revolution. Mavrodi realized what other swindlers did not. You don't need to keep the money to yourself. It is enough to organize a system where victims will cheat each other themselves, and he will remain in the shadows as ideologist and coordinator. 300,000 victims all over the world, and not a single dollar in Mavrodi's own accounts. When I was analyzing this scheme, a puzzle came together for me. Mavrodi showed how to use 3 new tools: mass media for instant audience reach, political chaos to legitimize distrust of the system, internet to create a decentralized structure without a central point of failure. But even Mavrodi could not foresee what would happen next. He could not imagine how cryptocurrencies would transform his decentralized model into something fundamentally new. And this is where the most interesting part of the story begins. Because those who came after Mavrodi created the technology that makes modern pyramids virtually invulnerable. The 3rd of January in the year 2009, a document appeared on the web that turned the world of finance upside down. 9 pages of technical description titled, Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic monetary system, written by the enigmatic Satoshi Nakamoto. Studying the first discussions of Bitcoin on the KP Cryptography Forum, I realized the creators of cryptocurrencies wanted to build an honest financial system without intermediaries. They had no idea that they were giving fraudsters the most powerful weapon in history. Because cryptocurrencies have solved 3 major problems that Ponzi and Mavrodi faced. Problem 1, footprints. When Ponzi transferred money through banks, each transaction left a paper trail. Bank documents, checks, receipts, all of these eventually led the investigation to his accounts. Mavrodi was smarter. He used cash and barter, but this too had limitations. Cryptocurrencies have given pseudonymity. All transactions seem to be visible in the blockchain, but linking a wallet to a real person is a separate task. And if you use mixers like Tornado Cash or Blender.io, tracking becomes a hell of a task. Reading Chainalysis, reports on the flows of dirty cryptocurrencies, I found out. In the year 2022, more than $20 billion passed through the mixers. Of that, less than 10% could be traced. Problem 2 is boundaries. Ponzi had a problem. He could only work in Boston, at most in the USA. Mavrodi's was only in the former Soviet Union. Expansion required opening offices, hiring people, obtaining licenses. Cryptocurrencies have removed geographical restrictions. With one click, you can send $1 million from London to Tokyo, bypassing all banks and regulators. No visas, no licenses, no currency laws. Moreover, the victims themselves come to the scammers. All you have to do is create a website, place adverts in social networks in 30 languages, and you will attract investors from all over the world. The third problem is trust. The most difficult task of any pyramid scheme is convincing people to give money to a stranger. Ponzi solved this through personal charm and recommendations. Mavrodi did it through television adverts and pseudo-scientific explanations. But cryptojackers have found a better way. Technological fetishism. Blockchain, smart contracts, DeFi, NFT. These words sound so scientific and complex that most people automatically trust them. If it's blockchain-based, then it's trustworthy, victims thought. Most importantly, cryptocurrencies have created the illusion of complete transparency. All transactions are visible in the blockchain. It is impossible to cheat. In fact, only the movements between wallets are visible. What is behind each address is a mystery behind 7 seals. Studying the technical documentation of the Forsage project in the GitHub archives, I realized modern crypto pyramids use smart contracts not for honesty, but for camouflage. The code looks complex and scientific, but in fact it fulfills the simplest function, redistributing money from late participants to early ones. But most ingeniously, they turn victims into evangelists. In a regular pyramid scheme, people are motivated by money. In a crypto pyramid, they are also motivated by ideology. We are building the finances of the future. We are fighting the banking system. This is a revolution. Victims feel that they are not suckers, but pioneers of a new era. The result exceeded all expectations. By the year 2023, the share of cryptocurrencies in financial pyramids had reached 48%. In Russia, more than 80%. But as I dug through the court documents of OneCoin, Finico, and dozens of other projects, a strange feeling started to hit me. Too many coincidences, too similar schemes, too many synchronized launches. And then I wondered, what if it's not just evolution? What if there is something more behind the wave of crypto pyramids than just technological progress? The answer to that question led me to discoveries that made me rethink everything I knew about modern financial fraud. To understand how perfect modern pyramid schemes have become, let's look at 3 cases. 3 schemes that showed cryptocurrencies have turned financial fraud into an exact science. Case 1. OneCoin, the cryptocurrency that didn't exist. The year 2014, Bulgaria. Ruja Ignatova, an Oxford law doctor and former McKinsey consultant, is launching a revolutionary cryptocurrency. The website looks professional. The white paper is full of technical terms. The promises are modest, not thousands of % profit, but stable growth like Bitcoin. As I studied the FBI materials, I realized OneCoin was brilliant precisely because of its simplicity. No blockchain, no miners, just a database on a server in Sofia, where numbers changed at the click of a mouse. But the victims didn't know that. They bought cryptocurrency education packages for euros and received OneCoin tokens. The tokens could not be withdrawn, exchanged or used, but it was possible to farm new ones by inviting friends. 4.5 billion euros in 3 years, 3 million victims worldwide. Rouget disappeared in 2017 and is still wanted by the FBI. Case 2, Finico, a pyramid scheme with artificial intelligence. The 2019 year, Tatarstan. Kirill Doronin, a 25-year-old programmer, creates the Finico investment platform. Legend, the neural network trades on crypto exchanges and brings up to 30% a month. Reading the investigation materials in the archives of the Russian Prosecutor General's office, I discovered there was no neural network. The money was simply redistributed among the participants in a classic Ponzi scheme. But the packaging was perfect. Website with real-time profit charts. A mobile application with push notifications about AI trades. Telegram channels with insights from traders. Victims felt part of an elite club of technology investors. 7 billion rubles of damage. 70,000 victims. Doronin has been arrested, but most of the money has not been found. It has gone through crypto exchanges to dozens of countries. Case 3. S Group is a Ukrainian crypto bank. 2022 year. Ukraine. Against the backdrop of war and economic instability, S Group, the first Ukrainian crypto bank, appears. Promises from 7 to 12% per month on investments in its own cryptocurrency. Analyzing the archives of Ukrainian media, I found details of the scheme. Clients bought fictitious S-coin tokens that were not listed on any exchange. All trading was done through the company's internal platform. The exchange rate was growing every day, thanks to successful investments. In reality, S-coin existed only in the S-group database, but the victims saw their investments grow, received interest, and brought friends. The referral program gave bonuses for each new client. Tens of thousands of victims. Payments stopped at the beginning of the year 2024. The founders disappeared with the money. 3 different countries, 3 different periods, 3 different legends. But when I compared the patterns of work, I was struck by the amount of overlap. All used fictitious cryptocurrencies or tokens. All had internal platforms with no access to external exchanges. All were actively promoted through social media and bloggers. Everyone promised revolutionary technologies, blockchain, AI, quantum algorithms. All had aggressive referral programs. All disappeared almost simultaneously at the first sign of trouble. But the most interesting thing is the technical side. Studying the code of the sites through the GitHub and Wayback Machine archives, I discovered many used identical templates, similar algorithms, identical modules for user management. It's like someone created a crypto pyramid constructor and handed it out to scammers around the world. Moreover, when I analyzed the launch dates of dozens of projects, I noticed a pattern. New schemes appeared in waves. The first wave was from 2014 to 2016. The second from 2019 to 2021. The third wave is starting right now. An accident? I don't think so. Because when I started digging deeper, looking for connections between the organizers, analyzing cryptocurrency flows, studying domain registration data, a picture began to emerge in front of me that explained everything. Modern pyramid schemes haven't just evolved. They've become part of something bigger, a system, an industry, maybe even a network that spans the globe. And this discovery led me to realize what makes them truly invulnerable. So I had all the pieces of the puzzle in front of me. From Ponzi postal coupons to Ruji Ignatova's fictitious tokens. 100 years of financial fraud evolution. And I finally realized what it was that made modern pyramids virtually invulnerable. The secret turned out to be not one technology, but a combination of them. The first level of protection is technological pseudonymity. Cryptocurrencies have given fraudsters what Ponzi schemers dreamed of: the ability to transfer millions while remaining in the shadows. When I traced the paths of money movement through blockchain analyzers, the picture became clear. Funds pass through dozens of wallets, mixers, and decentralized exchanges. By the time they are transferred to fiat, it is almost impossible to link the transaction to a specific person. The second level is geographic blurring. Classic pyramids have always had a center. The Ponzi office in Boston, the MMM headquarters in Moscow. Modern schemes have no physical location. Servers are in one country, domains are registered in another. Founders live in a third. Victims live all over the world. When OneCoin started being investigated in Bulgaria, operations moved to Dubai. When trouble started in the UAE, it moved to Singapore. Rouge could run a $4 billion empire from a laptop from anywhere on the planet. The third level is psychological camouflage. The most ingenious invention is turning victims into evangelists. Modern pyramids sell not just profit, but ideology. Revolution in finance, fight against the banking system, technologies of the future. Finico's victims were not just investing money, They believed they were building a new world. When the scheme collapsed, many continued to defend the project on social networks, blaming envious people and the system for the collapse. The fourth level is technical complexity. Blockchain, smart contracts, DeFi protocols. These terms sound so scientific that most people automatically trust them. Victims think, if the code is open and on GitHub, then everything is fair. In reality, the code can be perfectly legal and still function as a classic pyramid scheme. The fifth level is a decentralized structure. Modern schemes do not keep the money in one place. Funds circulate between participants directly through smart contracts. When authorities try to find the main account, it simply does not exist. There are thousands of small wallets linked by an algorithm. It was this combination that made crypto pyramids invulnerable. They solved all the problems that Ponzi and Mavrodi faced. There it is, the formula for the perfect 21st century pyramid. When I realized this, I felt a strange satisfaction. The mystery had been solved. The evolution from primitive Ponzi schemes to high-tech crypto machines of deception is logical and predictable. Each new tool, television, the internet, cryptocurrencies, made the pyramids more sophisticated. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the data screens. Hundreds of schemes, billions of stolen dollars, millions of victims. A sad but understandable picture of technological progress in the hands of fraudsters. It seemed that the investigation was completed. The mystery of invulnerability of modern pyramids was solved. But I didn't know then that I was only seeing the tip of the iceberg. When I was about to close my browser, my eyes caught on one detail in the hoist data that I had missed before. For those who are not in the know, Whois is like a passport of any website. It shows who registered it, what email was used, when it was created. This data is open to everyone. Finico's domain was registered through Namecheap. That's the usual case. But a familiar email flashed in the administrative contact field. I saw the same address in the registration details of S Group, and OneCoin, and 7 other projects on my list. I started cross-checking dozens of domains through Whois archives, and gradually, an incredible picture emerged. Someone coordinated the launch of schemes around the world. Someone provided the fraudsters not only with technology, but also with infrastructure. And that's when I realized my investigation wasn't over. I spent 3 days digging through the Whois archives, collating data, and the picture that emerged shocked me. It wasn't just Finico, OneCoin, and S Group that were linked by the same email address. In front of me was a network of 47 projects around the world, from Europe to Asia, from Latin America to Africa. But that was just the beginning. Having analyzed hosting providers' data through public databases, I found that most of these sites use servers from just a few companies. And all of these companies were linked to a single parent structure, a holding company in Singapore. What follows is more. Studying the GitHub archives, where many projects had placed their code, I found repositories with identical modules, user registration systems, algorithms for calculating interest, interfaces for offices. Everything was created in the same style and came out of the same hands. It was as if there was a pyramid scheme assembly line, and that's when I started looking for people. The first clue was that the OneCoin domain was registered to a shell company in Belize. Through corporate registration databases, I found the director, a certain Mikhail K. The same person was listed as a director in 8 other companies related to crypto projects. The second clue is that the Finico case file mentioned an IT security consultant, Andre V. After searching through LinkedIn and public databases, I discovered that he worked as a technical director at a company that developed platforms for innovative financial projects. The third clue is the most important. In the court documents on the S Group case, there was an independent auditor called Dmitry R. This person was checking the reliability of the investment scheme. But when I ran his biography, it turned out that he was the same auditor who had confirmed the financial stability of OneCoin and 12 other projects. Digging even deeper through public company registers and court databases, I found what I was looking for. All these people had one structure in common: an international consulting group with its head office in Dubai and branches in Singapore, Cyprus, and Panama. Officially, they were engaged in technology consulting for fintech startups. Unofficially, they created ready-made pyramid schemes to order. Their services included technical platform, Wiki, a ready-made website with a registration system, user accounts, simulated trading; legal packaging, registration of companies in offshore jurisdictions, preparation of documents, obtaining licenses in friendly jurisdictions; marketing support, creating a project legend, producing promotional materials, liaising with bloggers and influencers; technical security, setting up servers, protection from hackers, money laundering systems through cryptocurrency mixers; post-production, helping the project close down and the founders disappear at the first sign of trouble; full service, fraud franchise. Studying their price list in the archives of the Darknet, I discovered the cost of the basic package ranged from $50,000 to $100,000. For this money, the client received a ready-made pyramid scheme capable of raising millions. Profitability is thousands of %. But the most shocking discovery was at the end. As I analyzed the financial flows through blockchain analyzers, I realized that this group was not just selling services. They were getting a percentage of every amount stolen. Ruja Ignatova, Kirill Doronin, the creators of S Group, all of them were not independent fraudsters, but franchisees, executors in a global system. The real masters remained in the shadows, getting their share of billions of stolen money and preparing new schemes. And then I realized the main thing. Modern financial pyramids have become invulnerable not only thanks to technology. They became invulnerable thanks to industrialization. Fraud has become a business, a corporation, a freed machine. While the authorities are catching individual fraudsters, the real puppeteers are already preparing the next wave. And judging by the activity on the Darknet that I've been tracking in recent weeks, this wave will be the most destructive in history. This time, the scammers plan to use artificial intelligence. New schemes will analyze your social media profiles, determine your psychological type, and create personalized deception. For technology lovers, revolutionary blockchain. For conservatives, stable investments. For young people, crypto games with earnings. Deepfake technology will create an army of fake, successful investors who will tout profits in video testimonials. It will become impossible to discern the fake. It's no longer just a scam. It is an industry with a turnover of tens of billions of dollars, using the most advanced technologies on the planet. How to protect yourself. Never invest in projects that promise more than 10 to 15% per annum. Check licenses through the official registers of regulators. If you're being actively persuaded, that's a red flag. So now to summarize my investigation. In 100 years, pyramids have evolved from primitive Ponzi schemes to global corporations of deception. Technology has made them increasingly sophisticated and invulnerable. But we have one advantage: knowledge. Now you know how they work. Share this information. Warn your loved ones, because you could be the next victim. As always, your Mr. Dark Web. $4.5 billion. Try to imagine that amount. It would take more than 12 years to spend it, spending $1 million a day. For one man, it wasn't just money. It was the tool he was going to use to buy himself a world. But how did one man manage to pull off a scam of this magnitude, defrauding governments and banks around the world? That man's name is Joe Low, and his story begins with one ingenious deception that became the foundation for his entire empire. He was born into a wealthy Malaysian family, but quickly realized that his family's wealth was nothing compared to the real power. From the outset, he shrouded the true extent of his family's capital in a fog, cultivating an image of a man who acted not in his own name, but on behalf of powerful and anonymous investors from the Middle East. He created a legend about himself that was far more valuable capital than his family's actual assets. This myth became his main weapon, which he later converted into billions. For him, education became a tool for building a network. The elite Harrow School in London gave him friendship with the stepson of the future Prime Minister of Malaysia. Wharton Business School in the U.S., connections with influential families from Jordan and Kuwait. He became an indispensable bridge connecting three worlds: the political elite of his country, the limitless capital of the Middle East, and the financial legitimacy of the West. He ingeniously grasped that all these forces needed each other, and he was the only one who could connect them. Fascinated by the power of government sovereign funds, Low proposed turning the model upside down. Instead of investing the country's savings, his fund would borrow billions on world markets with government guarantees. The embezzlement occurred at the very moment the funds were raised. The fund didn't need to be successful. All it needed was the ability to borrow huge sums. It was a perfectly designed debt pyramid scheme designed to plunder. In 2009, this machine was launched as One Malaysia Development Berhad, or 1MDB. The first deal was to show how it would work. The fund invested $1 billion in a joint venture with the private Saudi oil company Petro Saudi International. On paper, everything looked flawless. But almost as soon as the money was transferred, over $700 million of that billion was secretly diverted to the account of a front company called Good Star Ltd, registered in the Seychelles. This company was owned by one man, Joe Low. It would seem that the mystery is solved, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. Because the real question isn't where the money went. It's how the deal got approved in the first place. As it later turned out, all the agreements were reached not in boardrooms, but on board a luxury yacht off the coast of Monaco, in the presence of a Saudi prince and Malaysian Prime Minister, Najib Razak himself. So who was Joe Low really, if he could dictate his will to such powerful people? Perhaps the answer will surprise you, as it surprised me when I was researching this topic. But Joe Low was a nobody. He was a mirror reflecting the ambitions of the most powerful people. The secret of his power over the Prime Minister and the Saudi prince was not in his personality, but in the structure he helped create. The 1MDB fund was designed with a fatal flaw that was in fact its main feature. All legal responsibility was concentrated in the hands of one man, Prime Minister Najib Razak, who had sole authority to approve any transactions, and all operational control was with an unofficial advisor, whose actions were not subject to formal oversight, and that person was Joe Low. It was a deliberately designed system to prevent any oversight. This Prime Minister was the face and legal shield, and Low was the brains and hands operating from the shadows. They were not partners in the usual sense. They were two heads of the same dragon designed to loot the public treasury. The first theft had proved that, but that was only the beginning. The success of the first heist only whetted their appetites. $700 million was good, but they needed billions to really play the game. To raise that kind of money in the international markets, they needed something they didn't have: an impeccable reputation. They needed a brand that the world trusted. They needed a Wall Street giant that would put its name on their dubious projects and, in effect, sell their legitimacy to them. Their choice fell on one of the most powerful banks in the world, Goldman Sachs. But how do you convince such a giant to cooperate? How could an unknown fund from Malaysia run from the shadows past the security scrutiny of a Wall Street pillar? In 2012, the answer was found. Goldman Sachs helped one MDB raise $3.5 billion by issuing 2 series of bonds. The bank's golden name opened the door to global capital. And as soon as those doors opened, the crooks struck a second, even more sophisticated blow. This time, the scheme was more complicated. About $1.4 billion of the amount raised was stolen and transferred to a Swiss account. The money went to a front company from the British Virgin Islands called Abar Investments PES Ltd. This name was almost identical to the name of the real subsidiary of the Abu Dhabi Sovereign Wealth Fund, creating deliberate confusion for banks and regulators. This was no longer just a theft, but a financial fraud using a corporate look-alike. They managed to fool the whole world by using the Goldman Sachs brand as a cover. But this gave rise to a new, even more disturbing mystery. The bank received a fabulous commission for its services, almost $600 million, a sum that by some estimates was 200 times the usual amount. Were the best minds on Wall Street so blind that they failed to spot the obvious signs of fraud? Or was this exorbitant fee not just a commission, but the price of silence and complicity in the scam of the century? The question about Goldman Sachs is not one of blindness, but of cynicism. The answer lay not in the bank's official reports, but in the culture of profit-seeking epitomized by its key employees. At the center of the scheme on the bank's side were 2 men: Tim Leissner, Goldman's head of Southeast Asia, and Roger Ng, head of the Malaysian division. The bank would later try to portray them as unscrupulous employees, the sole culprits, but it was only an attempt to save its reputation. Leissner himself admits that their actions were very much in line with the culture of Goldman Sachs. They were not deceived. They were partners. The bankers met personally with Joe Low and Najib Razak, realizing who they were dealing with. The astronomical commission of $600 million was not just a payment for risk. It was payment for active complicity, for selling the bank's most valuable asset, its name, which gave legitimacy to one of the greatest scams of the century. Goldman Sachs became a bloody funnel through which the fraudsters siphoned off billions. Having gained such a powerful ally, Joe Low and his patrons took the final, most audacious step. In 2013, Goldman Sachs organized a third issue of $3 billion worth of bonds for 1 MDB. The scheme ran like clockwork. Of these funds, more than 1 26/100 billion dollars was withdrawn into a bank account in Singapore. The account belonged to another shell company, Tanore Finance Corporation. The embezzlement machine was running at full speed, but this money was intended for the last and most important purpose. The year 2013 was a watershed year for Malaysia. The ruling coalition that had been in power for 61 years faced the real threat of defeat in a general election for the first time in decades. For Prime Minister Najib Razak and his shadowy advisor Joe Low, it was the moment of truth. A defeat meant more than a loss of power. It meant imminent investigation, exposure, and the collapse of their entire multi-billion-dollar scheme. Everything was at stake: their wealth, their freedom, their future. The stolen billions were no longer just trophies for a life of luxury. They were to become weapons. The final tranche obtained through Goldman Sachs' third bond issue was intended for just that purpose. More than $1 billion deposited into the accounts of the shell company Tenore Finance Corporation were waiting to be spent. It was the culmination of an entire multi-year plan to turn the stolen money into unbreakable political power, and they made their move with unprecedented audacity. From the accounts of Tenore, an offshore company controlled by an associate of Joe Low, some $700 million was transferred directly into the personal bank accounts of Prime Minister Najib Razak. This happened just before the election, turning the personal accounts of the head of state into a giant shadow fund to finance the political campaign. This money flooded into the electoral process, creating a veritable financial tsunami. The funds stolen from the Malaysian people were now used to bribe voters and finance the biggest election campaign in the country's history. The opposition was simply swept away by this money avalanche. In the end, the ruling coalition emerged victorious. It was a triumph bought with stolen money. For Joe Low, it was the height of his power. The embezzlement was complete, and political power was concretized. He had not just stolen money. He had subjugated the democratic process of an entire nation. He had transformed himself from a shadowy financier into a puppeteer who had secured victory for an entire regime and guaranteed himself absolute immunity. The game seemed over. He had won. But while victory was being celebrated in Kuala Lumpur, a storm was gathering on the other side of the world, in a quiet office in Switzerland. A former Petro-Saudi employee, a Swiss banker named Xavier Justo, was secretly copying a huge archive of data from his company's servers. 90 gigabytes of information, 227,000 emails and documents proving how the very first billion had been withdrawn. He didn't know it yet, but in his hands was the key that could bring down this entire multi-billion-dollar empire. The real war was just beginning. Joe Low's empire, seemingly indestructible after his electoral triumph, had one vulnerability. It was built on secrecy, and in the digital age, no secret can be kept forever. The Achilles heel of this colossus was one man, Swiss banker Xavier Justo, a former employee of the Saudi company Petro-Saudi. Frustrated with his former employers, he decided to take revenge. Before leaving, he copied an internal archive of the company's servers. It was a digital bomb. 90 gigabytes of data, including 227,000 emails and documents. These files were irrefutable evidence of how the very first $1 billion from the 1MDB fund was stolen. They contain the entire chronology of the negotiations on the yacht in Monaco, the money transfer patterns, and the details of the creation of the shell company, Good Star Leti. Justo may not have fully realized the extent of the information he possessed, but he knew it was valuable enough to try and sell it. When the blackmail failed, he put the entire archive in the hands of someone who knew what to do with it. That person was Claire Rucastle-Brown, a British journalist and founder of the independent blog Sarawak Report. For years, she had been investigating corruption in Malaysia, but never before had she been exposed to anything like this. When she realized that she could not handle a story of this magnitude alone, she made a strategic decision and shared the information with the Wall Street Journal. particularly Tom Wright and Bradley Hope. Now one of the most influential newspapers in the world is on the case. In the year 2015, there was thunder. The Wall Street Journal published an article that blew up the information space. Based on the Houston leak and their own sources, the journalists reported the stunning news. Nearly $700 million from the accounts of companies associated with 1MDB had been transferred directly to the personal bank accounts of the current Prime Minister of Malaysia, Najib Razak. This was no longer just a story of sophisticated financial fraud. It was a story of corruption at the highest level, backed up by documents. The response of the Najib Razak regime was desperate, swift, and ruthless. The so-called Week of Long Knives began in the country. The first to be sacked was Attorney General Abdul Ghani Patail, who appeared to be heading his own investigation team into the 1MDB case and was ready to indict the Prime Minister. His removal was tantamount to decapitating the official inquiry. What followed was a political purge. The Deputy Prime Minister and other cabinet ministers who dared to publicly question the Prime Minister's version of events or ask uncomfortable questions about the money in his accounts were immediately stripped of their posts. At the same time, the authorities launched a campaign to suppress dissent in the country. Opposition politicians were arrested, and websites publishing revelations, including the Sarawak Report, were blocked throughout Malaysia. For a while, it seemed that this tactic of total suppression had worked. The internal investigation was halted, critics were silenced, and the information field was cleaned up. Najib Razak and Joe Low, using the full might of the state machine, managed to win the battle domestically. But they did not realize that the war had already gone beyond its borders. Information about the global scam, backed by documents, had crossed oceans and reached the desks of people who could neither be dismissed nor intimidated. On the other side of the world, in Washington, D.C., the United States Department of Justice launched its own investigation as part of its Kleptocracy Asset Recovery Initiative. For U.S. prosecutors and FBI agents, this was not politics, but the pure maths of money laundering. They began methodically tracing the path of stolen billions through the global financial system. The case of 1MDB was officially labeled the biggest kleptocracy case to date. And now the most powerful legal machine on the planet was playing against Joe Law. The U.S. Department of Justice struck back with a non-trivial but extremely effective tactic. Instead of immediately trying to get at the elusive Joe Low or the immune-protected Prime Minister, they launched a war against the stolen assets themselves. Using civil forfeiture, they filed lawsuits not against people but against things: yachts, aeroplanes, mansions, and paintings, proving that they had been bought with dirty money. A global hunt for Joe Low's treasure began. It was these treasures that best illustrated the scale of the embezzlement. U.S. prosecutors began methodically dismantling the luxury empire Low had spent years building. They followed the trail of his legendary parties, where he earned the nickname The Whale, the name given to the most lavish players in Las Vegas casinos. At his 31st birthday party, guests were entertained by Britney Spears jumping out of a cake. He hired a Boeing 747 to celebrate New Year's Eve twice in one night, first in Australia and then flying across the dateline in Las Vegas. The confiscation list included the main symbol of his wealth, the 91-meter super yacht Equanimity, a floating palace worth $250 million. The yacht, with its cinema, spa, helipad, and gold leaf interiors, was discovered and seized in Indonesia, then handed over to Malaysia and auctioned off. She was followed by a $35 million private jet, and an extensive collection of luxury properties in Beverly Hills, London, and New York. The art collection, on which Lowe spent more than $200 million, attracted special attention of the investigators. He bought masterpieces not as a connoisseur, but as an investor, using art as an ideal asset for money laundering. His collection included works by Picasso, Monet, Van Gogh, and Basquiat. He gave many of these paintings to his friend, actor Leonardo DiCaprio, who was forced to hand over all the gifts, including priceless paintings, to the U.S. authorities after the scandal began. Joe Lowe's empire was crumbling before our eyes. Every headline about the confiscation of another yacht, mansion, or painting was another nail in the coffin of Najib Razak's regime. News of the incredible luxury in which the crooks bathed amid the country's economic woes enraged the Malaysian people. Public discontent, fueled by the revelations, grew by the day. The ruling coalition, which had seemed indestructible, was rapidly losing support. The general election of the year 2018 was approaching, and for the first time in the 61 years since independence, the unthinkable seemed possible. Could an entire regime that had ruled for decades collapse under the weight of the scandal it had tried so desperately to bury? The whole of Malaysia held its breath. The month of May in the year 2018 has gone down in Malaysian history. The impossible had happened. The ruling coalition, which had held power with an iron fist for 61 years since independence, suffered a crushing defeat in the general election. The MDB scandal, which Najib Razak tried so desperately to bury, was the main reason for his political demise. The Malaysian people, tired of corruption and lies, gave their verdict. A new government led by veteran Malaysian politician Mahathir Mohamad came to power. One of his first decrees was to immediately reopen the investigation into the 1MDB case. The icy hoop shackling justice has been broken. For Najib Razak and his entourage, it meant the end of everything. The reckoning had begun. The police searched the former prime minister's residences, and what they found stunned even the most experienced investigators. The results of the searches were a clear symbol of the greed that plagued the top brass. Cash, over 500 designer handbags, including the rarest Birkin models, 12,000 pieces of jewelry, and hundreds of expensive watches were seized. The total value of the seized property was estimated at $270 million, the largest asset seizure in Malaysian history. The country watched live as treasures bought with money stolen from it were removed from the palaces of its former rulers. Shortly thereafter, Najib Razak was arrested and tried. In July 2000, he was found guilty of 7 charges, including abuse of power and money laundering. He was sentenced to 12 years imprisonment, an unprecedented case in the country's history. The former prime minister, who seemed omnipotent, went to jail. His wife, Rosma Mansour, was also sentenced to 10 years for corruption. Justice, albeit belatedly, was served. The circle has closed. Almost all of the main participants in the scam ended up in the dock. Goldman Sachs bankers were convicted in the U.S. The prime minister's stepson, Hollywood producer Riza Aziz, avoided jail in exchange for the return of assets. Saudi businessmen have been convicted in Switzerland. The system they had spent so long building collapsed, burying its creators under the rubble. But there was one major unfinished chapter in the story. While his accomplices stood trial, the chief architect of the whole scheme, the brains behind the operation Joe Lowe, simply disappeared. The brains of the whole operation turned into a ghost. In 2016, Interpol put him on the International Wanted list, issuing a red notice. Lo himself, from his safe haven, continues to deny any guilt, claiming he is a victim of political persecution because of his support for the defeated regime of Najib Razak. He maintains the image of a man who has been unfairly vilified, but Lowe leads a very comfortable life. According to numerous reports by investigative journalists, Joe Lowe is not hiding in the jungle or on abandoned islands. He leads a luxurious lifestyle in a mansion in Shanghai's ultra-exclusive Green Hills neighborhood. It is alleged that he moves freely around China, enjoying his wealth and remaining completely out of reach of the justice system in Malaysia, the U.S., and Singapore. His freedom turned the case from a purely financial offense into a complex geopolitical issue. Joe Lowe has become a valuable asset and bargaining chip in the fragile diplomatic relationship between Malaysia and China. Negotiations over his possible extradition have become intertwined with major infrastructure projects under China's One Belt, One Road initiative and the struggle for regional influence. Beijing, meanwhile, continues to deny Lowe's presence on its territory, despite compelling evidence to the contrary. Thus concludes this grand saga. Joe Lowe, who began his journey by creating a myth about himself, became a myth himself. He has turned from a master of financial fraud into an important pawn in the global game of great powers. His ultimate fate now depends not so much on justice as on big politics. The man who wanted to buy the world ended up as a commodity on the global political market, and his story has become an eternal reminder that in a world of big money and big power, justice is not always the final authority. So, what conclusions can we draw from Joe's story? The story of Joe Lowe has shown that the era of primitive corruption with suitcases of cash is irretrievably gone. We live in an era of global, systemic kleptocracy, where crimes are committed not in spite of the system, but with its help. The most respected Wall Street banks can become a tool for embezzlement, and the noble purposes of public funds can become a mere screen for the plunder of an entire nation. The idea that this is only possible in the cinema is the main vulnerability on which fraudsters of this magnitude rely. The apotheosis of this cynicism was the fact that the production company of Joe Lowe, on the money stolen from the Malaysian people, made a Hollywood blockbuster, The Wolf of Wall Street, with Leonardo DiCaprio in the lead role. By the way, a good friend of Joe's before he was exposed. The film glorifying financial scams was funded by one of the greatest scams in history. The criminals literally laundered their reputations by turning dirty money into Hollywood glamour. The modern global financial system is not just a mechanism for investment. It is an efficient market where legitimacy is a tradable commodity, and the brand of a respected bank or the name of a Hollywood star is not just a symbol of success. It is a universal key that can open the door to the trust of the whole world. Stealing billions is no longer something out of a spy film. It's a streamlined business where entire countries are just lines on a list of potential targets. And remember the main lesson of this story. The greatest vulnerability in the system through which $4.5 billion were withdrawn was not a complex financial instrument, but human greed and willingness to believe in a charismatic man who promised access to inexhaustible wealth. Be extremely vigilant. Don't believe in fairy tales of easy money. Always question the origins of capital and take big names and brands as seriously as your own savings. Your financial hygiene is your greatest defense. As always, your Mr. Dark Web.